Since the release of Kingdom of the Planet Apes, I thought that now would be the perfect opportunity to do a huge ranking video of all the Planet of the Apes from the 1960s all the way up to the most recent one of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes to see which ones are the best ones and which ones are the weakest ones in the whole Planet of the Apes franchise spanning over several decades. Let's get into it. So, to start with, I think it's only fair we go from the 1968 Planet of the Apes.
Have always known about man.
For me, Planet of the Apes, the original, is the very best. I would put this in the GOAT tier, and I'll tell you why. Because I just think this is the perfect version of the Planet of the Apes, because they tried to do a full remake in 2001, and that just failed. Let's be honest, they didn't capture what made that special, and we'll get onto that later on. But this is why this is sort of like the perfect template of how to make the perfect Planet of the Apes film. And I think they're still trying to get to that level now, even with the newer films. And I think some of the films like in the early 10s were fantastic, like Rise, Dawn, and War, which we'll touch on later on. But I think that this film is just like the perfect template of how to make the perfect Planet of the Apes film. And not one of them has managed to replicate it and make a good quality film. And I think there's something special in them not having the graphics, the designs that they had. They all wore ape costumes, they looked the part as well. And even though you might think it looks a bit stupid, a bit kooky, them dressing up as apes and walking around, and you can tell it's fake and the rest of it, but that's what makes it even better. It's the opposite. It's like, Chewbacca in Star Wars is just a guy in a costume. But guess what? It works as just a guy in a costume. You're not acting with CGI. You're seeing the real thing, and you can react to the real thing. And I think it made it even more special. And I think the whole story surrounding humans not talking in the Planet of the Apes and having them crash down onto what they thought was a brand new planet, and then realizing that it was Earth towards the back end of the film, and then suddenly realizing what the Planet of the Apes was a full-blown lie, and that the planet of Earth had been overrun by apes and then learned how to talk, walk, and the rest of the things like humans did. And even the apes did not realize that that was the thing that happened. And after all its research and whatever, they always were brought up thinking that humans could not speak and the apes always could. Whereas that was never the case. And that's why I think this 1968 movie goes into so much detail. I can't wait to do a movie review on it in future. But no, I think this is the perfect example of how to do a Planet of the Apes movie. The next up is Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Nova.
Now, with Beneath the Planet of the Apes, I don't really think this one managed to hit the nail on the head like the first one did. I think this is one of those sequels where, we'll see what happens. The success of the first one was massive. We'll see what happens. And I don't really think this was that great, let's be honest. I think that this was quite a weird, really, really weird film. Because it was like, there's humans living under the ground and still alive, who can talk and the rest of it. And this was sort of like the end of the Planet of the Apes, where the planet blows up and everything like that, and the later films go back in time to go forward again. It's very weird. But Beneath, for me, weren't the same. It just felt like you're starting all over again with a brand new character, and the rest of it just didn't feel that great, I'm gonna be honest. So yeah, I'd say Beneath for me goes in maybe either average or poor. I would probably say poor, because if you're looking at the drop off from Planet of the Apes 1968 to Beneath, it is monumental. But no, I would say this is a poor film because it could have been 10 times better and executed 10 times better. So, Escape from the Planet of the Apes.
Apes did not love humans.
For me, as a third installment, weren't too shabby, because it feels like it flipped the effects of what Planet of the Apes was, in which was how would humans react to talking apes. Like in the original one, it was how would talking apes react to humans talking, and it was a wild concept because the two mixed. The first time round sounds more wild than this way around. However, it felt more wild in this way around because you just didn't expect that. Them going back in time and the rest of it, and the whole timeline of them going back in time was a bit awkward because I had to search it and was like, how did they go back in time? Oh, it was off screen and they jumped in Taylor's shuttle and the rest of it, or one of the other shuttles, and they managed to go back in time. However, for me, I think it was very interesting, that concept, and I enjoyed that overall part of the film of them being like questioned, like as if they were aliens or something like that. And I think that's what would happen in this modern day. But then the whole country then turning on them after finding out what happens in the future and after revealing what they now know, which is that in their world, apes rule the world and the rest of it. And it's almost like, as soon as the humans find out about what these apes were capable of doing, they sort of wanted to stop that and wanted to stop them taking over Earth. And they obviously found out about how Dr. Zyra, had experimented on humans and the rest of it. And saying that into a world full of humans isn't the best scenario. And when that happened, it sort of upset the apple cart, and they were no longer seeing celebrities, but wanted to be hunted down by the rest of the world because they were different. And to me, the concept was good, but the film was pretty average. Unfortunately, I don't think it hit the heights that we saw the original Planet of the Apes, and the ending was pretty dire of both Cornelius and Dr. Zyra being killed. And it made sense for the next film, but in a way it didn't make sense for the next film, because I think those two are the most lovable characters. I don't know if they were based off of books or anything, and if it happened in the books, then fair enough. But for me, it didn't make much sense to do what they did there. I'm just going to say that. Next up is Conquer for the Planet of the Apes.
The king is dead. Long live the king!
Again, I felt like it had a good concept of basically that gap fill of how did the apes take over the planet, which is the human planet Earth. And it was an interesting concept of basically apes then being used as pets, and not like a dog or anything like that, just being treated horribly. And just because they now knew what would happen with Cornelius and Dr. Zyra in the future, they wanted to put a stop to that and basically torture them and the rest of it, and keep them as pets and be mean to them and the rest of it. But when you watch this film, it's not the same as Escape, and I think Escape's actually better. He's got a good concept in Conquest, because eventually the apes do overturn that. It's basically like Rise of the Planet of the Apes, just the older version. And I don't think it's as good as Rise, and I think it's either poor or average. I'd probably put it just lower than Escape from the Planet of the Apes, but Conquer's on that level, because you could see actually, I would say it's a poor execution. Yeah, that's probably the best way of putting it. It's a poor execution of a good story, but yeah, I can definitely see how Conquest fits into it all. Next up, Battle. I think it's Battle for the Planet of the Apes.
Ape shall never kill Abe.
I'm not a fan of this one. I think it's just terrible. And we expected like a full-blown war like we saw from War of the Planet of the Apes. And that's why I think those remakes of Rise, Dawn, and Thingy, even though they're not classed as remakes, they technically are. The stories are taken from these original films. And Battle was just terrible. Battle showed no battle, even though it was called a battle. We saw the rise of Caesar in Conquest, and it was interesting then seeing how him as a leader now would go into battle, like we saw in, obviously, War of the Planet of the Apes and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. But it really didn't feel like a battle. It just felt like you're just watching them talk a lot, and the battle seemed to happen off screen. And it's like, why are we calling it Battle for the Planet of the Apes when we're not seeing an actual battle between humans and apes? It just felt like a waste of time, in my opinion. Next up is Planet of the Apes 2001.
Can't we all just get along?
And speaking of one of the worst Planet of the Apes movies, I think that this is just a terrible one. I would have said it's poor, because it was a poor execution of a good story, but it was a terrible execution of a good story. And I think Tim Burton, who directed this film, just just didn't get the grasp of what the original Planet of the Apes films were, and completely just destroyed everything good about the Planet of the Apes that we grew to love. And there's nothing special about this one. I think Mark Wahlberg in this one, I wouldn't even say he's a highlight. I think they appointed the wrong person in this film. I really do. I just don't think he fit in. And Mark Wahlberg and Tim Burton don't really click, I don't think. And yeah, I just think it was just a poor, just terrible film overall. And I think if you want to watch Planet of the Apes, just watch the original. The original is 10 times better. Even though it was made in 1968, it is still 10 times better. That shows how far this movie was down the pecking order from the original. Next up, we're now into the tens movies, in which are phenomenal. And we're starting off with Rise.
Caesar is home.
For me, Rise of the Planet of the Apes is one of my favourites. I love it. I think it makes more sense than what we saw in Conquest for the Planet of the Apes and other ones like that. I think the whole rise of Caesar is such a great story arc, and done in the modern day as well was brilliant. And I would probably put this one good and underrated, because people always going about Dawn and War. I think that Rise is really, really great and really underrated as well. I think there's an argument to put it in classic and it be the best, or even the GOAT level. These movies that I'm talking about now are in that same sort of ballpark as the original Planet of the Apes film, and there's an argument for any one of those to be the GOAT. But for me, since I'm only putting one in GOAT as well, and since Rise is one of my favourites, but I wouldn't say it's the best out of the newer lot, I do think it really shows how the Planet of the Apes was really formed from people getting ill, and also from Caesar's rise to power, from being a pet to then becoming smarter than anybody else after giving him this formula, and then ruling and being able to talk was something special. Next one, Dawn.
No.
I really like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I think that this one is my favourite. And people might say, oh, why not War or why not Rise? I don't know. I think when I watched it for the first time the other week, I think it was like, oh my god, this is what I expected from Planet of the Apes. And it felt that we finally got this human, untrustworthy thing going on against the apes. And even though James Franco weren't in the second one, in which I don't get why he weren't included in a role, because I think they should have put him in that film, because I think it was wrong him not being in there, because he did a lot of great work in Rise, and I think he should have been in Dawn, but that didn't take anything away, because you still had this power control and somebody who tried to kill Caesar, bear in mind, and it was one of his own people, because there was all this like human versus apes and not wanting to fight each other, just staying in their own sectors. And then when humans are spotted near their land, it sort of gets a bit frosty and they're like, oh, keep away or whatever. But then they do some work near the apes where they live, and when they do that work, they gain a lot of trust from the leader of the apes, Caesar. And then we're seeing this distrust from one or two of the humans reacting with Caesar. But then one of Caesar's people, which disagrees with and interacting with humans, what they did to them. See, the humans tortured the apes, and you can tell that really upsets the balance, and you're just waiting for somebody to snap. And obviously it does. And one of the apes, that was all like deputy, turns on Caesar, but then this creates the war, which we're going to be talking about in a second. But no, for me, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is an absolute classic. I would put it in GOAT level if there wasn't that rule of just putting one in the GOAT level, in which is my own rule. So I probably should have changed that rule and then put them both in there, because they're both great films. Next up, War for the Planet of the Apes. I think that this one is tad overrated. I don't believe this is better than Rise or Dawn, in my opinion, but I do think it is a good and underrated film. Well, it's overrated to people's perception that it's a classic, like, or even GOAT level. But for me, it is like a good film. That's it, really. And to me, I do believe that Rise and Dawn are maybe slightly better. I'm not sure. Right, it might be on similar sort of levels as Rise, but it's not on the levels that people think it is. I think the overall war was great. It was brutal at times, and you really got to see this villain in Woody Harrelson and thrive in that. As he captured apes, killed them, brutally murdered them, and the rest of it just to set an example. And I think this whole war being created in Dawn was fantastic, and the flow from Dawn to this one was fantastic. The overall flow, yeah. And ending in Caesar's death at the end, but toppling the villain and having the world of the apes and the apes really winning the war was brilliant, and I loved it. Lastly is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.
What a wonderful day!
I mean, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes for me is a really good film, and I would probably place this probably good and underrated a little bit. I think it was okay. I think it did a good job bringing back the Planet of the Apes franchise, but did it really need to come back? I don't know. But I think this is going to lead to what is next going to be in line, which is the complete overturn that we saw in Planet of the Apes. I think now we've caught up to that time period of Planet of the Apes 1968, where that's what they're going to try to redo next, because we're seeing this spaceship at the end with the satellite and stuff. But we're about to see how the future of the Planet Apes is going to continue. But no, I really think Kingdom was interesting because now Caesar's not involved. He isn't the main character anymore. But we're seeing this new wave of apes come together, and you're seeing the distrusts with humans still. It's just a good film. I wouldn't say it's on the levels of Rise, War, Dawn, any of those, or even the original. Well, I don't think it was that memorable. Let us know your thoughts on my rankings. Are they good? Do you agree with them? Do you completely disagree with them? Let us know all that jazz down in the comments down below. And if you haven't done so already, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and I shall see you fine folks in the next one. Like this.